Hey, hey, you know what time it is. Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We're back! We're back with Storytime with Chris. Hi, y'all. I hope you're having a wonderful day today on my favorite day of the week. And we're going to go ahead and get started because the last time we were here, we had a bit of a somber chapter with Taran and the fact that Cradock has passed on. He unfortunately fell off a very steep ledge and injured himself very badly. And Taran did use the horn that Eilonwy had gifted him to summon the fair folk for help. And he was healed and bandaged up and was able to get back home. But unfortunately, Cradock did not make it. So, without that, we're going to go ahead and begin. Chapter 16. Taran Wanderer. Fever came sweeping over him, a blazing forest through which he staggered endlessly, tossing on the straw pallet he knew neither day nor night. Often there were dream faces, half glimpsed, half recognized, of Eilonwy, of his companions, of all whom he had loved, yet they slipped away from him, shifting and changing like wind-driven clouds, or were swallowed by nightmares that made him cry out in terror. Later he seemed to see Fflewddur, but the bard had turned gaunt, hollow-eyed, his yellow hair matted on his forehead, his mouth pinched, and his long nose thin as a blade. His garment hung ragged and stained. Caw perched on his shoulder and croaked, "Taran! Taran!" "Yes, well, indeed, it's about time you're waking up," said Fflewddur, grinning at him. Beside the bard, Gurgi squatted on a wooden stool and peered at him anxiously. Taran rubbed his eyes, unsure whether he was asleep or awake. This time the faces did not vanish. He blinked. The sheepskin had been taken from the window and sunlight streamed over him. "Gurgi?" "Caw?" Taran murmured. "Fflewddur, what's happened to you? You look like half of yourself." "You're hardly one to talk about appearances, old friend." The bard chuckled. "If you could see yourself, I'm sure you'd agree you look worse than I do." Still baffled, Taran turned to Gurgi, who had leapt up joyously and clapped his hands. "Kindly master is awake again!" Gurgi shouted. "He is well without groanings and moanings, without shiverings and quiverings, and it is faithful, clever Gurgi who tends to him." "That's true," agreed Fflewddur. "For the past 2 weeks he's fussed over you like a mother hen, and he couldn't have given you more care if you'd been one of his pet lambs." "I rode straight as an arrow from Caerdalban," the bard continued. "Ah, well, the truth of it is I got lost for a time, then it began snowing. Lion plowed through drifts up to her ears, and even she finally had to stop. For a while we sheltered in a cave. Great Baylor, and I thought I'd never see the light of day again. It was the sort of journey that tends to make one rather unkempt. Not to mention 3/4 starved. Caw was the one who happened to find us, and he guided us along the clearer trails. As for Dalban," Fflewddur went on, "he was upset, considerably more than he wanted to show, though all he said was, 'Taran is not the herdsman's son, but whether or not he stays is a matter entirely of his own choosing.' And as so I came back as fast as I could," the bard concluded. "Alas, I didn't reach you sooner." He shook his head. "Gurgi told me what happened." "Cradock longed for a son," Taran answered slowly, "as I longed for parentage. I wonder if I would not have been happier had I believed him, though at the end I think I did. Gurgi and I could have climbed to safety. For the sake of Cradock I sounded Eilonwy's horn. For I had done it sooner, perhaps he might have lived. He was a man of courage and good heart, a proud man. Now he is dead. I saved the signal to use in a worthy cause, and when I found one, it was wasted." "Wasted?" answered Fflewddur. "I think not. Since you did your best and didn't begrudge using it, I shouldn't call it wasted at all." "There is more that you do not know," Taran said. He looked squarely at the bard. "My best? At first I thought to leave Cradock on the ledge." "Well, now," replied the bard, "each man has his moment of fear. If we all behaved as we often wish to, there'd be sorry doings in Prydain. Count the deed, not the thought." "In this I count my thought as much," Taran said in a cold voice. "It was not fear that held me back. Will you know the truth? I was ashamed to be base-born, so ashamed it sickened me. I would have left Cradock to his death. Yes, left him to die," he burst out. because I believed it would have set me free of him. I was ashamed to be the son of a herdsman, but no longer. Now my shame is for myself." He turned his face away and said no more. The companions wintered in the cottage, and little by little Taran's strength came back. At the first thaw, when the valley sparkled with melting snow and the streams burst from their ice-bound courses, Taran stood silently at the dooryard and looked at the pale green summits, pondering what had long been in his heart. "We'll soon be ready," said Fluter, who had come from seeing to Lion and the steeds. "The passes should be clear. The Lake of Lunette can't be too far, and with Ka to help us, we should have reached it in no time." "I've thought carefully on this," Taran replied. "All winter I've tried to decide what I should do, and never have I found an answer. But one thing is clear, and my mind is made up. I will not seek the mirror." "What's that you say?" cried Fluter. "Do I hear you aright? Give up your search? Now of all times! After all you've gone through, Taran, my boy, you've regained your health, but not your wits." Taran shook his head. "I give it up. My quest has brought only grief to all of you, and for me it's led me not to honor but to shame. Taran makes me sick at heart. I long to be of noble birth, long for it as much as I believed it was true. A proud birthright was all that counted for me. Those who had none, even when I admired them as I admired Edan, as I learned to admire Cradock, I deemed them lesser because of it. Without knowing them, I judged them less than what they were. Now I see them as true men, noble. They are far nobler than I. I am not proud of myself," Taran went on. "I may never be again. If I do find pride, I'll not find it in what I was or what I am, but what I am become. Not in my birth, but in myself." "All things considered, then," replied the bard, "the best thing would be to pack our gear and start for Caer Dallben." Taran shook his head. "I cannot face Dallben. Or Cole. One day, perhaps. Not now. I must make my own way, earn my own keep. Somehow the robin must scratch for his own worms." He stopped suddenly and looked, and wondering, at the bard. Ordu. Those were her words. I heard them only with my ears. Until now, I did not understand with my heart. "Searching for worms is unappetizing, to say the best of it," Fluter answered. "But it's true, everyone should have a skill. Take for yourself. And myself, for example. King though I am, as a bard, you'll find none better." A harp string snapped, and for a moment it appeared that several others might give way. "Yes, well, aside from that," Fluter said hastily, "if you don't mean to go home, then I suggest the free comets. The craftsmen there might welcome a willing apprentice." Taran thought for some moments, then nodded. "So shall I do. Now will I scorn no man's welcome." The bard's face fell. I fear I can't go with you, old friend. There's my own realm waiting. True enough, I'm happier wandering as a bard than sitting as a king, but already I've been too long away." "Then our ways must part again," Taran replied. "Will there ever be an end to saying farewell?"
"But Gurgi does not say farewell to kindly master," cried Gurgi, as Fluter went to gather up his gear. No, humble Gurgi toils at his side."
Taran bowed his head and turned away. "If the day comes when I deserve your faithfulness, that will be prize enough for me."
No,
Gurgi protested.
"Not prizings. Gurgi only gives what is in his heart to give. He stays and asks nothing more. Once you comforted friendless Gurgi, now let me comfort sorrowful master."
Taran felt the creature's hand on his shoulder. "Dallben spoke truth, old friend," he murmured. "Staunchness and good sense, all that and more. But your comfort stands me in better stead than all the cleverness in Prydain." Next morning, Taran and Fluter took leave of one another for the second time. Despite the bard's protest that a flam could always find his way, Taran insisted on Ka's going along as a guide. Once this task was done, Taran urged the crow to return to Caer Dallben, or, if it pleased him better, to fly freely as he chose. "I'll not bind you to my journey," Taran said to Ka, "for even I don't know where it may end."
"Then how do we fare?" cried Gurgi. "Faithful Gurgi follows, oh yes, but where does kindly master begin?"
The valley seemed suddenly empty as Taran stood unanswering. looking at the silent cottage and the small mound of stones marking Craddock's resting place. Times there were, Taran said, almost to himself, when I believed I was building my own prison with my own hands. Now I wonder if I shall ever labor as well and gain as much. Oh, excuse me, sorry. He turned to the waiting Gurgi. Where? He knelt, plucked a handful of dry grass from the turf, and cast it into the wind. The freshening wind bore the blades eastward, toward the free Kamots. There, Taran said, as the wind blows, so do we follow it. Since neither Taran nor Gurgi wished to leave the sheep behind, the wayfarers departed from the valley with the small flock bleating after them. Taran intended offering the animals to the first farmstead with good grazing land, yet several days passed, and he saw no inhabitable place. The two companions had started in southeasterly direction, but Taran soon gave Melalas free rein, and then, though aware the stallion was bearing more east than south, he paid little heed until they drew near the banks of a wide, rapid-flowing river. Here the pasture stretched broad and fair. Ahead, and he glimpsed an empty sheepfold. He noticed no flock, but the gate of the enclosure stood open as though awaiting the animals' return at any moment. The low-roofed cottage and sheds were neat and well kept. A pair of shaggy goats browsed near the dooryard. Taran blinked in surprise, for set about the cottage were all manner of woven baskets, some large, some small, some rising on stilts, and others seemingly dropped at random. Several trees by the river held wooden platforms, and along the river bank itself, Taran caught sight of what appeared to be a wire of carefully woven branches. Wooden stakes secured a number of nets and fishing lines drifting in the current. Puzzling over this farmhold, surely the strangest he had seen, Taran drew closer, dismounted, and as he did so, a tall figure ambled from the shed and made his way toward the companions. Taran glimpsed the farm wife peering from the cottage window. At the same time, as out of nowhere, half a dozen children of different ages burst into sight and began running and skipping toward the flock, laughing gaily and shouting to one another, "They're here! They're here!" Seeing Gurgi, they turned their attention from the sheep to cluster around him, clapping their hands in delight and calling out such merry-hearted greetings that the astounded creature could only laugh and clap his own hands in return. The man who stood before Taran was thin as a stick, with lank hair tumbling over his brow and blue eyes bright as a bird's. Indeed, his narrow shoulders and spindly legs made him look like a crane or stork. His jacket was too short in the arms, too long in the body, and his garments seemed pieced together with patches of all sizes, shapes, and colors. "I am Lonio, son of Lonwyn," he said, with a friendly grin and a wave of his hand. "A good greeting to you, whoever you may be." Taran bowed courteously. My name is Taran." "No more than that," said Lonio. "As a name, my friend, it's cropped a little short." He laughed good-heartedly. "Shall I call you Taran, son of nobody, Taran of nowhere? Since you're alive and breathing, obviously you're the son of two parents, and you're surely ridden here from somewhere else." "Call me, then, a wanderer." Title drop. "Call me, then, a wanderer," Taran replied. "Taran, wanderer? So be it, if that suits you." Lonio's glance was curious, but he asked no further. When Taran then spoke of seeking pasture for the sheep, Lonio nodded briskly. "Well, here shall they stay, and my thanks to you," he exclaimed. "There's no grazing fresher and sweeter, and no sheepfold safer. We've seen to that and laboured since the first thaw to make it so." "But I fear they may crowd your own flock," Taran said, though he admired Lonio's pasture land and a stoutly built enclosure, and would have been well content to leave the sheep with him. "My flock?" Lonio answered, laughing. "Ha ha ha ha! I had none other until this moment, though we've all been hoping and waiting, and the children have been talking of little else. A lucky wind it was that brought you to us. Go in, my wife needs wool to clothe our young ones. Now we'll have fleece and to spare." Wait, put in Taran, altogether baffled. "Do you mean you cleared a pasture and built a sheepfold without having any sheep at all? I don't understand. That was work in vain." "Was it now?" asked Lonio, winking shrewdly. "If I hadn't, would you be willing offering me a fine flock in the first place, and in the second, should I have the place to keep them? Is that not so?" "But you couldn't have known," Taran began. "Ha ha ha!" Lonio chuckled. "Why, look you, I knew that with any kind of luck, a flock of sheep was bound to come along one day. Everything else does. Now honor us by stopping here a while. Our fare can't match our thanks, but we'll feast you as best we can." Before Taran could answer, Lonio bent down to one of the little girls who was staring round-eyed at Gurgi. "Now then, Gwynliet, run see if the brown hen's choosing to lay us an egg today." He turned to Taran. "The brown egg's a moody creature," he said, "but when she's mind to, she puts down a handsome egg." He then set the rest of the children running off in different tasks, while Taran and Gurgi watched astonished at the hustle and bustle at this most peculiar household. Lonio led the two into the cottage where Gwyn gave them a warm welcome and bade them sit by the hearth. In no time, Gwynliant was back holding an egg in outstretched hands. "An egg!" cried Lunio, taking it from her, raising it aloft and peering as if he had never seen one before. "An egg it is! The finest the brown hen's given us! Look at the size, the shape, smooth as glass, and not a crack on it! We'll feast well on this, my friends!" At first Taran saw nothing extraordinary in the egg, which Lonio praised as highly, but caught up by the man's good spirits, Taran, to his own surprise, found himself looking at the egg as though he, too, had never seen one. In Lonio's hands the shell seemed to sparkle so brightly, to curve so gracefully and beautifully, that even Gurgi marveled at it. And Taran watched almost with regret as Gwyn cracked such a precious egg into a large earthen bowl. Nevertheless, if Lonio intended sharing it among his numerous family, Taran told himself the fare would indeed be meager. Yet as Gwyn stirred the contents of the bowl, the children crowded one after the other into the cottage, all bearing something that made Lonio call out cheerily at each discovery. "Savory herbs!" he cried. "That's splendid! Chop them up well. And here, what's this? A handful of flour. Better and better. We'll need that pot of milk the goat's given us too. A bit of cheese. Just the thing." Then he clapped his hands delightedly as the last and smallest child held up a fragment of honeycomb. "What luck! The bees have left us honey from the winter store." Gwyn, meanwhile, was busy popping out all these finds into the bowl, and before Taran's eyes, the contents soon filled it nearly to the brim. Even then his surprise did not end. Gwyn, I'm trying to figure out the proper Welsh pronunciation, because it's Goewin, so it's Gwyn. Gwyn. Which definitely poured the mixture onto a sheet of metal, which Taran was quite certain was nothing else but a warrior's shield hammered flat, and held it over the glowing embers. Within moments, the scent of cooking filled the cottage. Gurgi's mouth watered, and in no time the wife drew a dappled golden cake nearly as big as a cartwheel from the fireplace. Lonio quickly sliced it into pieces, and to Taran's amazement, there was not only enough for all, but some left over. He ate his fill of the most delicious egg he had never tasted, if egg it could now be called, and not even Gurgi could eat more. "Now then," said Lonio, when they had finished, "I'll see to my nets. Come along if you like." And that is where we will end for today. There is something to be said about the serendipitous nature of life. There are things that happen when they're meant to happen. Sometimes they may be coincidental, and sometimes you may just happen upon them because you were meant to be there at that moment. That's kind of what's happened to Taran. So we're going to see, with his newfound flight in life, as being Taran the Wanderer, which, by the way, title drop. Anytime you hear the title of something in that thing, like whether it's a movie or a book or a TV show, it's called a title drop. I love those moments when those happen. But without any further ado, I will bid you a happy afternoon, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.